So when I was in grade 6, my teacher would give us half an hour every Monday morning to write in our diaries. Or we could write stories. I didn't come from a literary household, so I'm not sure how I knew what a story was. We had some popular mechanics books, and my mom had some trashy novels. But writing in a diary seemed creepy, like looking at myself naked in a mirror for half an hour. So I wrote stories of murder and of cannibalism, and whatever I thought sex was in grade 6. The chief villain in my life at the time was Billy Smith. He was the goalie for the New York Islanders. Gretzky would come around the net, and Billy Smith would hit him. So in one of my stories, Billy Smith goes psychotic, and he escapes from the authorities, and he ends up at Skeleton Lake, where my grandfather had a cabin. Now, I didn't know I was doing it at the time, but I was satirizing members of my extended family, like my 14-year-old cousin Scott, who would smoke cigarettes like a 45-year-old woman, and my aunt, who had beat us with a shoe. Billy Smith arrived, and he stalked the members of my family, and he killed each of them in gruesome fashion, and he ate them. All but one, me, the hero. I defeated Billy Smith, and he vomited up my family, and somehow this process unmurdered them. So the teacher called my parents in for a meeting. She was weeping before she sat down, and she said she'd been having nightmares about me and my stories, and that my parents had two choices. They could either send me to a psychiatrist or take me out of her class. So they took the stories home, and they locked themselves in the bedroom, and I listened at the door. And 5 minutes later, they were laughing. They did not send me to a psychiatrist. Instead, they photocopied the stories and gave them to members of my extended family who had starred in them. Cousin Scott, Aunt Judy. And I still remember the time at Christmas at my grandfather's house when people are reading them for the first time, laughing and grimacing and pointing at me like I was the freak. But a certain kind of freak, a story freak. I grew up, my parents did not have much money. My dad was a clerk and my mom worked at a gas station. My house was sort of like the house in The Rocking Horse Winner, the D.H. Lawrence short story in the film, where in the corridors you'd hear whispers of humiliation and failure and money. Money, money, money. But I was good in school, and I did not want to be poor. I wanted to be rich. And on TV, rich people were lawyers. So I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted a BMW, and I wanted Armani suits, and I wanted cocaine. And then in the third year of university, this man, an author and professor named Todd Babiak, wrote on one of my essays, "You are a writer." And I dismissed it at first because I was a lawyer. But I thought back to grade 6, and I thought about how it felt to write that essay and to see those words, "You are a writer." So I asked him for a meeting, and he said, "I'm sure you'll be a fine lawyer, but you won't be happy. You'll only be happy doing one thing." And it's true, when I was in the university library, I would leave my studies and go to the literature section, and I'd open a book, and I'd read a paragraph, and the way it made me feel was like I was falling in love. I still remember the first time I read the line by Pablo Neruda, "I want to do with you what spring does with the cherry trees." I read that line and I nearly fainted. And I don't think this happened to other boys. I wanted to go to Montreal, so I applied to McGill for law and business, and I applied to Concordia for literature and writing. And to my parents' horror, I chose writing. But unlike my writer friends, I still wanted a BMW and an Armani suit. And I think everyone wants cocaine. But with the 3-figure advance I got from my first novel, I could not even afford the arm of an Armani suit. In my family, when you graduated, you looked for a job. But arts jobs were not BMW jobs. They weren't even, as you know, used Buick jobs. I helped launch a station called Book Television, and that ended disastrously. So I sought a writing career with a solid, stable, long-term future. Newspaper journalism. I worked at the newspaper, and I was a critic, and I was a columnist, and I met great people, and I had a lovely time. And then when he was 59 years old, my dad, this is him, he has the largest cell phone in the world here. He was a one-armed man. My dad started laughing at things that weren't funny. He He bought $1,200 worth of Christmas lights in July. His eyes changed. He started prowling his house and the neighborhood all night. And then just maybe he lit a fire in his car and got inside and closed the door. It turned out he had one of those blooming cancers, and it had moved into his brain. He died when he was 60, 5 years before retirement. I understand that critics are important. I admire them. But I was beginning to realize at the newspaper that I was not one at heart. What I like about writing novels is it's essentially creative. It's constructive. And what I was doing at the newspaper was deconstructive. I had inherited my dad's height and his squirrely energy, and I had to accept the possibility that I had also inherited his cancer. I had written some novels, and they had done well enough, but they were outside the literary canon. They were sad, funny, romantic books. I was 35 years old, and therefore 5 years past middle age. I was making $75,000 a year at the newspaper, and the people who owned the chain were heading into financial ruin. And I was starting to hear whispers of money, money, money in the corridors of my own house, which was falling apart, and my car was falling apart. I didn't want my daughters to grow up into that atmosphere of lower middle class grievance I knew so well, where people are blaming everyone else for their problems. I was smart in school. I could have been a lawyer. I could hear myself saying it already. But I was working on a new kind of novel set in France. It was a suspense book. And this new kind of novel was attached to something I'd always loved for no good reason. I'm ethnically a mongrel. I'm everything but France. But French novels, French wine, French everything. I was in love with it. And I like France more than French people do. But writing this novel in my basement, it was a failure of the imagination. I couldn't see it, and I didn't have any money. I was unhappy. I was losing my hair. I was obsessed with death. I was having a crisis. So I went to a party, and one of my friends is an academic, and he was talking about his sabbatical that he was going to have, and it sounded so cozy. He was going to putter around the house and maybe get in shape, work on a paper or two. This coziness was lovely to me, but if you go back to the history of the sabbatical, it was anything but cozy. The sabbatical is from ancient Israel, and in the original idea of a sabbatical, it was a covenant between God and the farmer. Every 7 years, the farmer would leave the land, let it lie fallow, and he'd go off and study the Torah. This made no financial sense. It was a matter of belief and faith and mystery. You do this thing that makes no sense, and God will reward you. So I went to speak to my editor-in-chief. This is a picture of him. And I told him I needed a sabbatical. And he said, "We don't have a sabbatical program." I said, "Well, I have to go." And he asked me why. And I couldn't tell him the truth, that my dad had died 5 years before retirement, that I no longer liked writing about politics, and that I hoped God, in whom I did not believe, would grant me a miracle, would save my life. He asked if I had inherited money, and I had not. He asked if I had saved money. Well, he knew how much I made, and he knew that we were a one-income family. I could see that he was questioning my sanity, especially when I told him no matter what he said, I was taking a sabbatical. So he sort of leaned over his desk and said, "Are you quitting?" And I had not prepared for this moment. I'm not a religious person, but this was spiritual. It was beyond reason. I told him, "Yes, I think I'm quitting." Now, no one thought this was sane. Even when the newspaper agreed to pay me a bit of freelance money for articles that I could write from France. My mom cried for a really long time. I didn't lie to my wife exactly about the financial situation we were in, but I didn't tell her the truth either. But I'll tell you guys. We had no money saved. I was going deeper into debt every single month. There was a global financial crisis on, newspapers were shutting down all over the continent, and the dollar was 68 cents against the euro. But I had one very North American thing: equity in my house. A year in France worth of equity. Red Frog Events it's a company in Chicago. It was named the best company of the year, a small business, in 2011. They dream up and organize these kooky community parties or corporate parties. And the dreaming up part is what inspired the CEO of this company, Joe Reynolds, to give every one of his employees a paid sabbatical every 5 years. Joe Reynolds had dreamed up the company himself when he was on Red Frog Beach in Panama on his own sabbatical. And when you ask him the reasons why he loves the sabbatical, he says, going outside your comfort zone elicits unconventional ideas. In 2012, about 30% of American companies had sabbatical programs, and they're all just about the same. You spend 6 months in Asia or a year in Brazil, and you come back to the same job you left behind, or something very similar. Now, this is conventional, and this is comfortable, but I think it's a flaw in the design. I will never do another sabbatical thinking I will return to the position I'd left behind. This is the academic model. It's a long holiday. A sabbatical is most useful, most provocative, most delicious, and most profitable, I think, for the individual and for the economy when it's something else. This is Vipin Goyal. He quit his unsatisfying job in online video a few years ago. And instead of finding another job, he and his wife sold some stuff, bought airplane tickets, and traveled the world for 6 months while they tried to figure out what to do with the second half of their lives. And their friends responded to their sabbatical the way our friends responded to ours. You're so lucky. How did you do it? I wish I could. And we always said the same thing, that there's nothing stopping you. We had no money. We were absolutely broke, with dim future prospects and 2 little kids. You just find a way to make it work, and you go. And there's something in this finding a way to make it work that will be instructive. Uncertainty is almost never an advantage until it is. And midway through a sabbatical, when you're operating in this zone of novelty and discomfort and danger and delight, you'll discover aspects of your personality that no amount of yoga or meditation could reveal. We arrived in our little house in France and discovered it wasn't really a house at all. It was a storage unit. The American woman we had rented it from was a hoarder, and she didn't tell us that part. We arrived, and it was just full of junk, mountains of dust, scorpions, apple cores, used Kleenexes. We got H1N1. We got lice. One morning, to please my daughters, I took them to the town pool, and the people there made me rent a Speedo that another man had just worn. It was still wet. It had one of his pubic hair in it. We had to move to another city, which cost thousands of dollars. It was amazing. Risk is the foundation of our economy and our culture. As you know, no one talks about Leonardo da Vinci because he got good sleep. And risk is scary until it becomes this daily negotiation, and you develop new muscles. You crave invention. This is why I think so many immigrants become successful entrepreneurs. You pick up your kids, and you leave your network, you leave your family behind to go to a new society, often in a new language. After that, everything else just seems easy. Vipin Goyal did not come back to another job. Instead, he founded a company called Side Tour, based on his experiences on his sabbatical. And Side Tour finds extraordinary experiences in your city and turns them into mini sabbaticals from regular life. And Vipin Goyal is doing more for himself, for his city, and for his country as founder of Side Tour than he ever could have as an executive with an online video company. But 7 months into my sabbatical, I had still not found my Side Tour. God had not granted me my miracle. The newspaper was now heading into bankruptcy, and my editor-in-chief and publisher, who had been my champions at the paper, were leaving. I was more, not less, terrified. And then I went on a freelance assignment to some wineries. And at one of them, Chateau Beaucastel, the owner said something I'd heard many times from people in the wine industry. He said, "Nous ne nous sommes pas raconté l'histoire du vin français." We're not telling the story of French wine. And I thought about why I love French wine, the co-op systems and the village appellations, the fact that they're digging up Roman pottery when they plant new vines in the Rhone Valley, the families, the grapes, the blends, the codes. And I thought of my friends in North America, my sophisticated friends who bought wine, and how they buy the grape. They'd been taught by Australian and Californian wine marketers to identify with Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot or Pinot Noir. My friends could not tell me what grapes are in a bottle of Bordeaux or a bottle of Burgundy. There are 13 grapes in a bottle of Chateau Beaucastel Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And there's a beautiful reason for this. And the reason Châteauneuf-du-Pape is called Châteauneuf-du-Pape is also beautiful. And I realized that the French wine industry had a billion-dollar or multi-billion-dollar asset they weren't using: story. They weren't inviting us in, and the story is an invitation. My friends are intimidated by French wine. At Chateau Beaucastel, I wondered if there could be a company that would use story to solve business problems, to help with marketing and branding, operations, with strategy and planning. I was tasting wine that day, and I was not spitting it out. But I did feel like a cherry tree in the springtime. I came back from France, and I co-founded Story Engine, and in a year and a half, I paid off my sabbatical. I still write novels. The one I was writing in France actually is coming out fairly soon. But now I do something to support my novel writing habit with something that's just as creative and just as constructive. I help people build things and grow things using story. And I never would have done it. I never would have had the courage or even the idea if I'd not gone off to study the Torah, if I'd not let the land lie fallow, if I'd not learned to love discomfort. Now, it may be that every one of you has already found that thing that makes you feel the way you feel when you're falling in love. Maybe you're not at all inclined to crises, but I have a feeling you are. And I want to encourage you to embrace the crisis, to do something that makes no sense, to make your mom cry for a really long time, to take a sabbatical when you need one, a real one that terrifies you. No matter what you're doing, you can leave it for a year, and it will be just fine. All of us are on a 7-year cycle if we want to be. I bet every one of you is in better financial and psychological shape than I was in 2009. And even if you're not, if you're spending 20 minutes of your short, precious, beautiful life listening to a TED Talk instead of having sex, I would say you're highly employable. Put yourself on that 7-year cycle, somewhere, anywhere. And when the time is right, or even better, I think, entirely wrong, just quit and go and believe. You'll come back different. You'll come back better. Thank you so much for listening.